This is week number 11 in which we are going over lists. And lists have a couple of elements by which they are created with, and those ones we will be going over in this week. And in CSS there are a couple of CSS properties that are specifically for lists and can only be used for lists, such as these ones here. And in addition there are two other ones that we will also take a look at that are related to lists. And also we will introduce a couple of new selectors in this week. Under the category of lists fall all the drop-down and the navigation lists ultimately. And our navigation list that we already have on our website, this one we have created by using the div and the anchor elements. However, whenever we can, we should go for the meaningful alternative, even though we can create them by using the div and the anchor. However, we should go for the meaningful version, as we have discussed already that screen readers as well as search engine robots ultimately can better identify what our website is about and where things are on the website. And those navigation lists are the simple ones, and of course we will also be taking a look at the drop-down part here. And that drop-down part is ultimately a list again, consisting of list items, and whenever we go over this item, for example, another drop-down list is opening up and other list items are being displayed then. And these drop-down parts of the list, they are positioned on top of other content. We will be taking them out of the flow. It will give us therefore a very good repetition of what we have done last week, in which week we have discussed out of flow positioning. Let's get started with lists, and here I have created 4 container boxes. Each of them ultimately will be a container box in which we have one type of list in which we will be displaying in here. And we start with 2 list types, and that is the ordered list and the unordered list. And both of these lists can have LI, list items, inside them. In fact, that is the only thing that they can have as children, and list items can only be in unordered and ordered lists. Now, why should we use the ordered, and why should we use an unordered? When should we use an unordered list? What is the difference between them? Let us just create both of those lists now, and then we can immediately identify what the difference actually is. It's exactly what the name already implies, but let's take a look visually. So here in that first white container box, I'm now creating an ordered list, and in the other one I am creating an unordered list. And in both of them can and are only list items as immediate children. And the list items, so let me just write in here item 1, and let me copy and paste a couple of them over, and also copy and paste them right in here. And here we can see them now. So these items here are listed in an order 1, 2, 3, 4. In comparison to those list items here, they do not have any order. They are unordered lists. List items that are using a so-called marker. In this case, by default, the marker that is being used is just a dot, a so-called disk, which we will be taking a look at how to change that marker in a moment. But let us first concentrate on our ordered list, where we also have control of what ordering type, what ordering system here we want to use. By default, a decimal system is used, a numeric system, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4 by default. And we have control by using attributes. And these attributes that we will now go over can only be used for ordered list items. They cannot be used on unordered lists, because they directly have to do with ordering, and therefore they can only be used in the unordered list. And 3 of those attributes are specified inside the ordered element, or OL element, and the 4th one ultimately will be specified in the LI element. So let's get started with one of those attributes, and that is the type attribute. And this one ultimately lets us define what ordering type, what system we want to use. By default, the value 1 is being used here, and which will give us a numeric ordering 1, 2, 3, 4. Alternatively, we can use either lowercase or uppercase a, which gives us an alphabetic ordering. and once I reload the page, A, B, C, D in uppercase in this case. And the last alternative that we have here is a Roman ordering, either the uppercase I or the lowercase I, and then we will ultimately receive that type of ordering. Now the second attribute that we have here is reversed, and that reversed attribute, that one ultimately reverses the order, exactly what the name already implies. It will now start at the most top value, and it will finish at the most bottom one, which is 1 in this case. And that case we can change, because we also have control over where things shall start. And the start value is now defined just in a number. So it's not the case that we are now defining things in Roman or in alphabetical, with alphabet letters. Instead, it's just a number. For example, if I am now using 3, then it will be starting at 3. And in this case, it's even ending at 0, which is kind of weird. I haven't actually seen that one before, because I haven't yet used the reversed attribute, and this one cannot be used on all browsers. For example, Microsoft doesn't support that attribute. And the reversed attribute is a Boolean attribute, because either we specify it or we don't. It's either yes or no. So if we don't specify it, then things will not be reversed. Things are now starting at 3 at the value that we have specified in the start attribute, and it's ordered in a Roman way, the one that we have specified by using the type attribute. Now there is one more attribute that is defined on a list item. A list item that must be a child of OL. It's not a list item that can have this attribute when it's a child of UL, unordered lists. As once again, because it is referring to the ordering. And here we are defining the attribute value, or can define it, by which we can determine where the value, where the ranking, the ordering shall continue from this point onwards. So we can override basically the start value. Things are starting at 3, then it goes to 4, and then it would be 5, but we can change it right here, for example to 8, and then from that point onwards it will continue at the value 8 in that system type, that order type that we have specified. So let me go, for example, for an alphabetical way, which we can maybe better identify these things. Now it's 3 is C, then D, then H. Now we have also control over that type, that ordering type, by using a CSS property. Now why do we have control over both, or in both, in HTML as well as in CSS, over the ordering type? And the reason lies in the history. In HTML5, the latest version in which we are writing our code in that version, that places a great emphasis on accessibility. That screen readers, meaning sight-disabled people, and also search engine robots, can make better sense of our website, and therefore they introduced those attributes, or better said, they actually reintroduced them. And when they did so in HTML5, the other properties that we can also use to define the type were already in use, and that's why they didn't change that anymore. So nowadays we have both options to either specify the type in here or in CSS. However, we should, when we can, always specify it in here for that reason of accessibility, so that screen readers and search engine robots can make better sense of it. We may have wondered maybe, or we may be wondering, why isn't it the case that shouldn't screen readers already make sense of it by just reading it right here? As when they read C, then most likely it's alphabetical ordering, and it will most likely start at number 3. However, it's exactly this ordering is actually not part of our HTML. And therefore, screen readers, they can only read HTML code. And that ordering is defined inside the padding area of the unordered, of the ordered list. And there it's kind of invisible. It's not part of the code. This is just how the browser is making that reacting, or it's creating this ordering. So therefore, the screen readers or search engine robots have no chance to identify it. This is why we should specify it inside the type attribute and the start attribute, by which they can then identify what that ordering is about and where it is starting at. Let's, however, take a look at the CSS option that we have in order to define the type attribute or the type of the ordering. And therefore, first of all, we need to select the OL element. And let's assume for now that there are a number of other OL ordered list elements on our website. Therefore, we only want that one single OL element. And we can do so by giving it an ID or a class, of course. But let's go for an option where we do not make use of an ID of a class. So we could select its parent, but this one has no ID or class either. Its grandparent has an ID. So this one we could select, and we could use 2 times a child selector, for example, something that we haven't really been using yet. So let's take a look at this one. So we can use the child selector. Hey, select the child of the element with the ID list container. The child is the div element in this case. So the div child, and from that point onwards we can chain another child selector and then the child OL. And this would be one option, and now we are introducing a new element selector. And that is not the child, but the descendant selector. And that is not represented by any symbol, such as the child selector here. Instead, just by nothing, just by using a white space in between the first selection and the second one. And that would now select all the descendants that are of type, element type OL, that are descendants of the element with the ID list container. And now here we can specify in our list style type, and that is the one by which we can also determine the ordering type. For example, we can also use, in addition here, Armenian. We are not limited here what we are inside our HTML by Roman or decimal or alphabetical values. Instead, we can use, for example, Armenian ordering, which is the Armenian numbers right here. And also other exotic ones can be used here, and they are not part of the type values that we can use here, because they are not part of accessibility. Ultimately, Armenian language is only accessible to those people who speak Armenian, so therefore only those ones that can be identified by basically the entire world, those types can be used right here in front in HTML. And the exotic values, some exotic values we can use here, which not all of them we are going over, just another one I want to use. All the other ones are inside the Excel sheet as usual. And one more would be, for example, decimal leading 0. Now this is not very different from decimal, and we could also specify here 1. It would give the exact same meaning ultimately to screen readers or search engine robots. But instead it's kind of a stylistic thing. It also attaches a 0 in front of the number for all the numbers that are below 10. And we can see that always the list style type, whatever we are specifying here, will ultimately always override whatever we have specified in as a value for the type attribute. This list style type can not only be used for ordered list, but also for unordered lists. However, the values that can be used here are different, because these values are not related to ordering instead than to the marker that is being used here. The default value right here now is disk, and that is exactly what's given to us, that circle, that black circle. Alternatively, we can actually also use that value circle, and it will also give us a circle but with a white background in the middle. And once I have changed it to unordered list here. And another value, and that is the last one that we can use, is square, or the last value that ultimately gives us a certain marker. And here now we have a square. One more value we will take a look at in a moment, which is none, meaning we do not want any list marker at all, and that one will be used ultimately for navigation lists. Let's first of all, however, finish with all the other properties we actually have here, among which is also list style position. And in order to understand that property, what it actually does, let us inspect our list items. and right here is the list item, and we can see that this list item, it's a container element, container box, nothing else. However, why is it so far to the left, to the right? Because there is a padding set on the unordered list, a padding of 40 pixel. And in that padding area, this is exactly where the marker is getting displayed. So meaning that marker is outside the actual list item box. And this is what we can do, what we can define, what we can determine by using the list style position. By default, the value that's being used here is outside, and we can change it to inside. And that means that ultimately the box, the marker, will now be inside the list item. Now this might probably not be a feature that we make use of on a day-to-day basis, and also not the next one. Even though it sounds quite nice, that feature, however, it has quite some limitations too. List style image, meaning we can, instead of using a marker, such as a square or a circle, for example, we can use an image instead, which is a very nice option. And here we are telling the browser, hey, which image to fetch from the server. And whenever we want the browser to fetch something, we are of course defining it by the URL function. It's that block of code inside the browser that can provide us that functionality of fetching us something from the server. And inside these brackets, we of course need to give him the path to the server where that image is located. And that path only consists always of text, therefore we wrap it inside quotation marks. Now I'm going out one folder, the CSS folder out, inside the images folder, and there I have an image which I have given a name of list, and the image file format is PNG. And that image is now being displayed here, which looks quite okay. But however, this one only looks quite okay when we are using an image that is not greater than the text, either has the same size as the text or is smaller. Otherwise, it will look like this, and we have no option to get this text in the center next to the image. Therefore, less likely we would make use of that list style image property. And let's go once again into the alternative, into an option that we have already discussed in week number 4. But because it's such an important option to get text centered next to an image, I want to repeat it for a moment, and also while we are doing so, we are getting into 2 other things that I want to mention. First of all, list items inside can have anything that we want to, any other element. It's just that the UL or the OL element, the immediate children, must be list items. But whatever is inside these list items is completely up to us. Whatever element we want, for example, an image element which I'm now giving a source and the path to the server. In this case, I'm in the root folder. Now I'm going into the media folder, then into the images folder, and now I will be specifying that list larger image which I have given the name to, and the file format is PNG. And below there will be a little bit of text, and for example, service item number 1 that we provide if we have a service website. And we can use now an image to list a list, for first of all, a list to specify our services that we provide. And here's the actual image, and that is the text to it, and we can center it by using vertical align in the middle. And now I'm doing something that we shouldn't do, that is inline styling. However, to keep it a little bit shorter now, to not make the selection in CSS, I'm going for the shortcut here, and I'm specifying middle. And this is exactly what we also need to do to our text. And therefore we need to wrap this text inside an element in order to give it also vertical align middle. Now alternatively we may think, and this is exactly what I want to go over, why I'm also repeating now this option of centering text next to an image. We could select the parent and then all its children by using the selector inside CSS. Let me just type it out here in HTML. By using li, for example, the children, all of them. But this all, as well as the child selector, always refer to elements. Let's take a look at our vocabulary, and here we can see these element selectors. These are element selectors, as the name implies. They only select elements, they will not be selecting text. Therefore, even though if we go for such a selection, select all its children, we always nevertheless need to wrap our text in between an element. It's always necessary, something that I wanted to repeat and want to give us once again the idea that these are element selectors. Since we are going over quite a number, we are doing the overview basically in this week of all the different type of selectors. So these are the element selectors. So now in here I can now copy and paste this style over, or I could use now the child selector, or it will now also select the span element ultimately. And by now having saved this, the text will now be right in the center next to the image. So this is most likely the option that we would go for instead of using list style image. And this is it. Now one more thing to discuss is actually the shortcut. All of these properties are part of the shortcut list style. And here we can define, for example, only the list style type. It's exactly the same when we are using, for example, the background property, which is also a shortcut. Sometimes we use it, or often we use it just to specify a color, because the background color is the first value in this shortcut. And it also happens that the first value in the shortcut list style is list style type, the property we most likely make use of on a day-to-day basis when we are creating websites. Image position less likely. Image would be the second position, the second value in the shortcut, position the third. And when we don't specify them, then they fall back to their default value, which is none for image and which is outside for position. And now let me only make use of list style type here, and let me specify now the value none. We don't want any marker being used for our list items. And that is the value that we make use of when we are creating navigation lists, or at least most likely, because our navigation items in here, they shall not have any marker, any circle, any square, or anything like. They shall not have any marker. Also, what we would remove now is the padding area that is right here on the unordered as well as the ordered list, and the margin that's being applied by default on top and bottom. So most likely something that we would also remove for creating our navigation list. So let me set margin and also the padding to 0. And let me reload the page. Now here we can see the items. No more padding, no more margin. And let's get into our navigation lists now. And therefore I have already created the list items in here. This is our navigation container, which is our reddish box. And in here is the unordered list, and the only children that can be in here, and the li elements can also not be used outside the ul or ol element. The only children in here are the list items. And we are using an unordered list because, of course, our navigation items are not ordered in any way. 1, 2, 3, they are unordered. Now the question is, isn't that maybe double meaning that we are giving here to our content, because navigation is already a meaningful element by which screen readers or search engine robots could identify, hey, that this is actually the navigation menu. And this depends on the situation. Let us, for example, take a look at this website here. And here we can see that the navigation is actually consisting of the entire area here, including the unordered list. That would be the unordered list. And then in here would be the individual list items. While this one is not part of the unordered list, it's still part of the navigation. And not only for that reason, even in our case where the navigation and the unordered list is actually the same, also because sight-disabled people have a couple of shortcuts on their keyboard that they can use in order to jump around from navigation to unordered list, etc. So we should, when we can, always make use of navigation as well as the meaningful element of unordered lists. Even though in this case, both of them, they are block level container boxes, same as the li elements. And the UL, because it's block level, it will be, what's the dimension rule for the width? It will be as wide as its parent. Therefore, if I was about now to give that unordered list a background color, we can see it's ending right here. It's taking up the exact same area as the navigation. So let me give it a background color in this case. So we are on the same page where the unordered list actually is. It's orange now, taking up, it's going all the way from left to all the way to the right here. And in here are the individual list items, week 2, 3, 4, etc. And those ones, list items, LI elements, by default are display block. They are block level container boxes. So what I have done here is I have selected them by using the descendant selector, and I have set them to display inline block, vertically aligned them to the top straight away, and I have given them a border on the right of 1 pixel in black. Therefore, we can ultimately identify the list items always by this border, because later we will see that we will including a drop-down list here, and that one will also be part of that list item. So therefore I have now been also already given that one a border. What are the rules by default now for inline level container boxes? They are as wide, not as their parent, but as wide as the content. And this is exactly the width they are now taking up. I haven't yet specified any width. Now the height rule never changes for for block level container boxes or for inline level container boxes. Always it will be determined by the content if we don't specify a height for a container box. So it will be as high as its content, these list items. And the UL I haven't given a height either, so this one is ultimately determined by the list item's height. So it's kind of a domino effect going on here. One determines the height of the other because none of them have, I have yet specified any height. Now, of course, we want our list item nevertheless to be anchor elements ultimately, clickable elements, links. However, we cannot use anchor elements inside the UL, but as we have already discussed, inside the list item, we can create whatever we want, and this is where we are creating the anchor element, and in here we will be placing week number 2. And here we go. Now this is an anchor, a link ultimately now. And now we are going into drop-down lists. And there are ultimately always 2 boxes that are relevant to us. 2 boxes always comes in 2 boxes. For example, on this website, let's take a look right in here. So the unordered list is this one. That's our UL element. Now the LI element in here are both of them, all events and all cities. These are the list items in here. And if we are including a drop-down as well, meaning when we are going over with the mouse over that list item, the drop-down shows up. And that drop-down is also that drop-down list is also part of the actual list item. Meaning we will be creating that list item ultimately will have 2 boxes inside them. That's the LI element. And those 2 boxes, one of them we have already created as well. That is the anchor element in this case, or whatever we are using. Div can also be div, doesn't matter. But that one will represent the actual list item, the top part. And the lower part will be the entire drop-down menu. So always 4 boxes here, unordered list outside, then the actual list item, and inside here are 2 boxes. One represents the top part and one the entire drop-down list. And that drop-down list might be another unordered list. So in here are once again then list items. And this list item might even consist of another drop-down list. So once again it's exactly the same procedure. Then this list item will then be will be divided up into its top part, or in this case it's actually its left part, but again it will be the exact same 2 boxes then. One represents the top part and the other one represents the lower part. It's always the same, and once in here, this white box now could be another unordered list. Once again, this one has list items inside, and those list items could once again consist of 2 parts, upper part, lower part, always the same procedure. And once we understood this fundamental procedure, this structure, then we are all set ultimately. It's all fine. We can create any drop-down menu out there. So 3 of those boxes we already have: the unordered list, the list item. The unordered list is the orange box. The list items are week 2, 3, 4, etc. And that is the upper part inside the list. And then the 4th box, the lower part, is the actual drop-down that we are now creating here. And this one can be an unordered list in case the list items are immediately there. Sometimes, however, it's the case that the list items are not immediately inside here, as it is the case in this drop-down menu, which we will be investigating in a moment. So therefore, I'm now using not a UL element, I'm using a div element first. And later we take a look at immediate drop-down menus where we are making use of UL here straight away. Doesn't matter, div and UL are container boxes, nothing else. Now this drop-down menu, this drop-down part of the list item, I will be giving now a class of nav subcontainer1. And this nav subcontainer does not have yet any height, as it has no content. Therefore nothing will change on our website yet. However, now I will be giving it a width, a height, and also a background color, so we can clearly identify it. So let me give it a width of 200 pixel and also a height of 200 pixel, and let me give it a background color of green. And let's take a look what happens. Now here is the box. And I will be going over into detail what is actually going on here, but I want to be brief now to show you how easy it actually is. All we need to do now is take it out of flow, now this container box, and we are all set up. Position, and the value that we will be using here is absolute, which we do a brief review here once again in a moment. But that's the result. That's all we need to do. Now let us now go one step back. Let me outcomment the position absolute, and let's take a look what actually happens here once we have now created that green container box, once we have given it a width and a height. Its parent is the list item. The list item includes the upper part, week 2, and the green box. And it is the one that has this border on the right side. Now the height was not specified for that list item, for the parent of the green box. Therefore, it will be as high as its content, as we can see here. Now these LI elements, the list items that include those 2 parts, they are inline level container boxes, and they will always be as wide as their content. The content is the green box, that's the widest one in here, and therefore the list item is as wide as its content. Now the unordered list, I haven't given a height either, nor have I given a height to the navigation container. Therefore both of them will also be determined and ultimately by their children's height, which in this case is the LI element. Therefore the UL is also that high. And the navigation, which is the parent of the UL, is also that high. So it's a complete domino effect that's going on here whenever we don't specify a certain height to something. Then it's defined by the children, which once again is defined by the grandchildren, and so on. So this is our container box. And this one we take out of the flow, but let's take a little bit a review here on what actually out of flow is, or what the normal flow is, first of all. All our elements, our entire content on our website by default is in the so-called normal flow. And that means wherever our content is inside our HTML file, in that order, that content is displayed on our website. Week 3, week 4, week 5, that order, whether it be inline, 2, 3, 4, or block later, which we will be going over here, our vertical drop down, 2, 3, 4, it's always that order in which things are displayed as they are inside the code. Further, all the in-flow elements, the normal flow elements, are always relative to the parent. If I was to give now, for example, the list item here, the first list item, a width of 40%. 40% is always a relative value. 40% of what? 40% of the parent. And the parent of this list item is the unordered list going until here. Here is 100%, meaning 40% would approximately be right here. So it's relative to the parent. Also, if we are not defining to the parent, if we are not giving the parent any width or height, then the height will be determined by its content. So it's relative to the parent here. The content in here determines the height of the parent. And also the width in this case, because its parent is an inline container box. So it's always relative to the parent. And once we take things out of the flow by changing the value position static to any other value, we take things out of the flow, we bring them to a different layer on a different layer level, and therefore they are not affecting the actual content anymore, and most of these values are not relative to the parent, and therefore they will not determine the width and the height of its parent anymore, and the width will be relative to somewhere else, which we take a look at in a moment. But whichever other value we use than static, we can then make use of these properties. These are the properties that can be used when we have an element out of flow. And one value that we can use is fixed, position fixed. And position fixed elements are relative to the viewport. Not to the parent, but to the viewport. For example, our top navigation that we have used as an example last week, that is fixed to the viewport. And if I would give that one a width of 40%, it would not go 100% of the viewport. It would be relative to the viewport. 100% is here. It would be 40% approximately be right here of the viewport. And it's not only relative to the viewport, position fixed, but as the name implies, and its most important feature is it's fixed to the viewport. Meaning whenever we are scrolling the page, those elements are always displayed at the same position at the viewport. They are attached, fixed to the viewport. And that is exactly that feature why we would use position fixed. Whenever we do not want anything fixed to the viewport, we go for position absolute. And then there is this third value, which we are going over in a moment. But whenever we do not want anything fixed, we go for the value absolute. And this is now what I'm doing to our green box. Now, it does not determine the width and height of its parent anymore, and it's not relative to its parent. Even though still it starts out at the location where the code is inside our HTML file. But as soon as we are now making use of a width, for example, of 50%, then this 50% is not relative to the parent, which would mean half of its list item, which would mean only a very thin box would ultimately be there until here. Instead, it will be 50% of the viewport. And therefore, even it's still at the location where it is inside the code, but the value 50% of width refers to the viewport, is relative to the viewport. And now we of course have access to top, right, bottom, left and Z index, and as soon as we are making use of them, for example top 30 pixel, question is top of what? Top of the viewport. And this is how we can move our box around wherever we ultimately want it to be positioned. It's relative to the viewport, our absolute as well as our fixed elements. However, for absolute it does not necessarily need to be relative to the viewport, as we have discussed already, but we will take a brief review in a moment. In this situation right now, we don't need to move it away with top, right, bottom and left, because our container box is already at that location where we ultimately want it to be. It's right underneath week number 2. It's where it starts out. This is already the correct location where we want that box to be. So it's all fine. Nothing that we need to change at this point. Of course, what we would change now is we don't want that box to be displayed. It shall be display none. So the other value that we have introduced last week for the display property. And when shall it be displayed? When the mouse is over the list item, the top part and the bottom part. Meaning when the mouse is over the entire list item. That includes the top and the bottom part. And therefore this is the element that I will now be selecting, and we will introduce here a new selector. So I select all the list items, and now comes a pseudo selector. Pseudo meaning faked selector, because it's not selecting an element, instead it's selecting the state of an element, in which state the element is, in what condition, when the mouse is over the element, then display that that element. The element that is a child of the li, when that one gets hovered, then that child with the class subcontainer1 shall ultimately be changed from display none, which I have forgot to set yet, to display block. First of all, of course, it must be set to display none. So once again, we are using the descendant selector here. All the list items that are children of the div container box, our navigation here, with the ID nav container. So we are selecting now all the li elements, and we are saying when they get hover, all of them, then the child with the class nav subcontainer1 shall be displayed. And the only child or the only li element that has this subcontainer with the class nav subcontainer1 is the week number 2. Therefore, nothing will change when we are going over all the other li elements here, but only when we are going over week number 2. Then this container box shows up, and also when our mouse is over that area, it is still there. So this is our drop-down menu, nothing difficult to create. Now we are going into another type of drop-down list. Let me therefore target, for example, week number 2. Once again, we need 2 container boxes. First of all, we have our unordered list. Inside here are the list items. And the list items consist of the top part and the lower part. The top part, once again, let me make it an anchor element. That one, of course, also depends on the situation. Sometimes we don't want the top part to be a link. Sometimes only the list items inside the sub menu. But that depends on the situation. We can, of course, also use here a div element or any other element. So that's the top part. Now let's go for the bottom part, and once again, let's make that one a div element. That one will be the drop-down list. And that one I will be giving a class now, in this case, a class of nav subcontainer number 2, our second example. Right now, nothing happens apart from the week 5 turning into a link now. But the nav subcontainer 2 doesn't have any height, so it's not visible on the website. Therefore, once again, let me start off with the exact same values that we have used for our first example as well. Here with a width of 200 pixels and a height of 200 pixels and a background color of green. Once again, it's now in the flow, it's taking up the space, it's determining the height and the width of its parent, and also in this case of the grandparent. So let's take it out of the flow. Let's take it out of the flow using position and the value absolute, because we do not want that drop-down menu to be fixed to the viewport. It shall be absolute in this case, and here we can see everything as expected, same as week number 2. However, now we are going for a different type of drop-down menu. And that type of drop-down menu is not starting immediately underneath the list item. Instead, this one is stretching all the way from the left to all the way to the right. So in our case, we want that drop-down to start at the unordered list or navigation. Here it shall start right here, and it shall end right here. So this is where we are now making use of left and right together. And once we do so, we are indirectly determining the width of the element. Left and right together, we are telling the browser, hey, it shall be at the left and at the right, which ultimately determines the width. So let me therefore remove the width. However, at this given point, now our element is relative to the viewport. Therefore, it will start at left 0, its relative left 0 at viewport, and it will also be there at right 0 at the viewport, making the entire box stretching up the entire area here. However, of course, we want it to stop right here, and we want it to start right here. So what we need to do is we need to make one of its parents, of the green box parents. We need to take these parents out of the flow. And then our absolute box will not be relative to the viewport anymore. Instead, it will be relative to that element that we take out of the flow, to that parent that we take out of the flow. And that parent is the unordered list in this case, because that is the one that ends right here. So this is where we want the green box to end then ultimately when we are using right and left. And the unordered list in this case is nav container UL, which I have already selected somewhere. That is right here. This one I will be making position. And now comes the question, which value? If I now take this unordered list and make it fixed, for example, then the unordered list would be fixed and would always be visible here when we are scrolling the page. If I would change it to absolute, then this one would be relative to the viewport, and it would also give up its spot where it is to whatever comes afterwards. So there is one more value that we can use here, and that is position relative. And that one doesn't change anything. It will still occupy the area that it would occupy if it was in normal flow, and it would still be relative to the parent. It will not change anything apart from making the element being out of the flow. So what this one actually does, and what we always use it for, is it provides a relativity point for an absolute positioned element, so that this absolute positioned element is not relative to the viewport. Instead, it is relative to that parent that is position relative. So that's where that relative value even comes from. It's a relativity point for an absolutely positioned element. And absolute means absolutely, completely. It can completely be relative to any parent. This is where that value name absolute comes from. So fixed we only use when we want something fixed. If we don't want that, we go for absolute. And if we want to make an absolute element relative to one of its parents, we go for relative. These are our three values that we are dealing with. And now it's relative to its parent. It's ending right here, left, right, 0 here, left, 0 here. However, the unordered list, which I have made position relative, that one actually included also our vertical list straight away that we will be working with in a moment. And therefore both of them are out of the flow, and the one that is listed last in the code will be on top. And therefore we have our C index, a Z index, by which we can determine which element shall be further in the foreground and which one shall be further in the foreground. So in this case, let me just give that one a value of 100, and here we go, it's now in the foreground. Let me also give that Z index to our other drop-down menu, because that one is actually now in the background as well. And that drop-down menu is right here. One more comment to our second drop-down menu. We do not want to have it displayed. We are setting it to display none, and we do want it to be displayed when we are going over week number 5, the top part, as well as the drop-down list as well. So in this case, we are targeting once again the parent, which we already have targeted. But what we have yet specified is that when the li items get hovered over, then the child with the class nav subcontainer 1 shall be displayed. So let me use now the multiple selection here by using a comma. And once again, when the list item gets hovered, then the child with the class name nav subcontainer 2 shall be displayed. And the only li element that has a child with that class is our week number 5 list item. And therefore nothing will happen when we go over any other item here, only when we are going over week number 5. That drop down now drops down when we are going over week number 2, then this drop down drops down. Now let's go into our vertical drop down here, and here we are doing an example with multiple drop downs. Whether we are doing this on a vertical drop down or on a horizontal drop down, which would then turn into vertical ultimately, completely doesn't matter. It's exactly the same logic. First of all, once again, we are dealing with our two container boxes, nothing else. The UL and the LI, and inside the LI we are creating the top part, which is, let me once again make use of an anchor in this case, and this one will be the top part, week number 5, and the lower part will be the drop-down part. And this one will immediately be a list. And that is the unordered list. Therefore, that one I will be giving the class name, in this case, of V nav subcontainer, vertical nav subcontainer, navigation subcontainer. Nothing will yet change, exactly the same thing, apart from the week number 5 now turning into an actual link that can be clicked. The vnav subcontainer does not yet have any height, therefore it's not visible on the website, so therefore let me give it a height now. And the height I will be giving it is, once again, let's start with 200 pixel, and let me also give it a width of 200 pixels, and also a background color once again, and also in this case, let me go for green. And here we go, this is our container box that's now there. It's in the flow, it's taking up space in the flow, whatever comes afterwards has to make room for it. And this one determines ultimately also the height of its list item. Doesn't determine the width though, because these are now list items that I haven't changed to display block. That I haven't changed to display inline block, meaning they are still block level elements. And they are as wide as their parent. That goes until here. And this one I will now take out of the flow by using position absolute once again. And this is out of the flow now. And now we are moving it around though, with using left and top. And we also need to make one of its parents position relative. Where do we want it to be relative to? First of all, where shall that container box ultimately end up? Let me therefore mark it for a moment. It's the container, the drop-down part for week number 5. So meaning it shall show up at this location. And therefore we are making this list item the relativity point, position relative, for this absolute positioned element. And then we are using top 0, which would then mean right top here to its parent now, what it's to its element that it is relative to, which is accidentally it is its parent. So top 0 right here. And then how far away from the left do we move it? Now this is its parent, is ending right here, the list item is ending here. Here it is at 100%. So all we need to do is use left 100%. And then our green box is right at this location. So let's first of all make our list items, here the vertical list items, let's make them position relative. Relative, so it's a relativity point now for our absolute item. And now I'm changing it first of all to top 0, meaning top of the list item here. Top 0. And now let me change it to left 100%. Referring to the 100% of the element to which it is relative to, which is the list item going until here. This is where it is at 100%. So left 100% would move our subcontainer box now right here where we want it. Now this one, once again, let us go into display none, and the list item here, when those ones get hovered over, then the child, then the one list item that has the child with the class name vnav subcontainer, then it shall change to display block. And here we go, now it's being displayed. So let us now insert some li elements inside our unordered list here. Li elements, these are the sub items in sub items, and let me create 4 of them in this case. And here we go. Now they still have actually, I haven't removed yet the marker yet, list style type none, and also I haven't yet removed the padding here, so it's still there. Doesn't matter, let me leave it for now. What we are going for is another logic, and that one is, how do we now create another sub container here? And all we need to do is exactly the same procedure. What does the li element consist of? It consists of the upper part, which is for example, an anchor, doesn't need to be, can be any element. That is the upper part for the sub item, and then comes the ultimate drop down menu. And that one can be anything. Let me immediately make it another UL item, so another unordered list, and let me give that one a class, for example, of vnav sub container. And this one I will now be targeting. Right now nothing has changed because the sub container box has no width and no height. Exactly the same process. So let me now give it a height of 200 pixels, and let me also give it a width of 200 pixels and also a background color. This one I will now be changing so we can see the difference. I change it to orange. And here we go. This is our sub box now, which is in normal flow. It's taking up its spot. It's relative to its parent. And now we will be taking it out of the flow by using position, once again, absolute. Absolute, yeah, that's correct. And here we can see it's out of the flow and we need to move it. Once again, it's exactly the same thing what we have just done. So we need to make, this is the list item here, this one, that this is part, that the sub list, that the drop-down list is part of. And this one shall be the relativity point. And that is the reason why I'm now selecting the v-nav subcontainer, and here the child, that is li, and this one I will be making position relative, so that our absolute positioned element is relative to that one instead of being relative to another parent. And once I have done so, we can now position it around according in the same way that we did so before. Top 0, so it will ultimately be here, and left 100%. Exactly the same thing. So let me just copy and paste it over. And here we have our subcontainer. Now this one, of course, once again, shall only be displayed when it's over the area, so display none. And it shall be visible ultimately when we are going over the entire list item. Then the child with the class name v-nav subcontainer shall ultimately change from display none to display block. And once we go over here, this one shows up. So this is our nav, our sub nav container boxes that we can create. Nothing really difficult. It's always unordered list item. List item consists of upper part and lower part. Always the same procedure. And now we are going into a couple of stylistic things here that are not new to us, but something that we need to consider, that we encounter here now when we are dealing with list items. And let me first of all target now the navigation list, the horizontal one. And those list items I will now be giving a certain width and a height. First of all, let me go for the height of 35 pixels. And that one would be like this. How do we vertically align those items? We can do so by going for line height and setting the line height to the exact same value as the height. And then we have them vertically aligned. Because of the baseline, because the baseline is always positioned in a way that the text of the current font size will always be in the center. So things that we have discussed in week number 4, I believe. So this is the line height. Now let's go for a certain width. Now the width completely depends. We most likely would go for a minimum width here. For example, if we had an item that's name is golf, for example, and the other one would be outdoor pursuit or anything else, something longer, a longer word. Now this golf item shall not be that small in its size, this list item. So it shall at least be a minimum, for example, a minimum width of, let's say, 80 pixels. Now anything that's larger ultimately has more text inside will then be larger than 80 pixel, but a minimum of 80 pixel we want those list items to be. How do we horizontally center it? Nothing difficult, of course. All we need to do is we need to target the actual anchor element, so we can target, or the list item, doesn't matter actually in this case. So let me set it to text align center, because it will be inherited down to the anchor elements. And here we can see they are now centered in the middle. And now comes something that I want to bring across here, that we are not only dealing with when we are dealing with navigation lists, but here we are seeing that effect now. The actual link is only the text, week 2. That's part here. The other part that's not occupied by week 2 by that text cannot be clicked. It's not a clickable area. So the link from an historic point, they are display inline elements, and they are as wide as their content, as wide as week number 2, as that text that is there right now. So in order for it to take up the entire area, we need, for example, we need to change it to display inline block, then we can give it a width, but a much simpler option is just to make it display block, because block level container boxes are as wide as their parent, meaning they will take up the entire area. So this is what I will now be setting on the anchor elements. So something to consider here, and that is the immediate child. In this case, let me set it to display block, and then they will take up as wide. They are now as wide as the parent, as the list item, and therefore the entire area is now clickable, also the remaining part here. Now something else, for example, if I now really had a longer, if we really had a longer list item now that has that not just consists of week number 2, etc., but for example, that consists of week number 5 and something else, something longer, then here we can see the size of the list item increases now as well. It's a minimum width of 80 pixels. However, now that text is right at the edge of the border in this case, and therefore this one is not good, of course. In particular, if the next item, if we didn't have a border, then it wouldn't matter. But then if the next item text would also be large, then they would meet exactly next to each other. They would be exactly next to each other. So we would go for a padding here. And now let me set this padding on the list item. Padding, top, bottom, nothing. But for example, left and right, 5 pixels. Now once again, we are encountering this issue that this area here is not clickable, which I would say it's not too bad, 5 pixels, but most likely it's something that we don't want. So that padding, something to keep in mind. We should specify on the actual anchor element. Then everything is fine. So on the anchor, it's not on the list item itself. The list item is still the same, and therefore the entire area is clickable. Now another thing that I briefly want to discuss is for vertical drop-downs. Let me give those ones now a height as well, and let us vertically center them, which we have just done already by using the line height property. However, something to consider here as well, not only referring to drop-down to lists in general, but this is something that we are encountering now, and a height of 35 pixels, which would be okay, and then we vertically align it by using line height. Line height 35 pixels. Now this one cannot be completely be seen right now, but if we take a look at week number 2, it's not completely in the middle. It's not completely centered, and this is because of border bottom. If I would now change that one to 5 pixels, it's nothing new that we are encountering here. But some things are coming together here. So if I give now 5 pixels, we can see it quite clearly that this text is not in the center. And that is because we have set to the browser inside our generic style sheet, hey, or doesn't need to be inside the generic style sheet, can be in any style sheet, but we have used a box sizing border box for all our elements, meaning that the border and the padding area shall always be included inside width and height calculations, which is great because then we never need to recalculate the width and the height. However, this is now giving us an example which is still fine, but where we need to consider this, that the height is not really 35 pixels anymore. The height is now 30 pixels because there is a border at the bottom on 5 pixels, which reduces the height to 30 pixels, meaning the line height must then also be 30 pixels in order for the text being vertically centered in the middle. So something to consider here as well. And now I want to briefly go over another drop-down list here, which is this one. Let me set it to display block in order that I can draw on it and do the example. And let me go into rules and change it to block. And so first of all, we are dealing here with our unordered list, of course. Then we have our list item, and then that list item has not actually a square shape now, because our lower part of that list item is of course out of the flow, not determining the width and the height anymore. So this is our second box, the LI element, the list item. Now our third and fourth box are the children of the list item, and those ones are the upper and the lower part here. So the upper part is here, and the lower part is the actual drop-down menu. Now in here, this green box, this drop-down menu would not be a UL list straight away. It would be a div element. And in here, we can create whatever we want to ultimately. Even though this box has been taken out of the flow, it's now having its own normal flow inside here, by which we can create now block level elements, inline level elements, whatever we ultimately want. And as recommended already several times, whatever belongs together should be in its own box. So in this case, it would be the left part right here, and it would be the right part right here. Now let's go into the right part quickly in first. Now on the right part, there is just one box, and that one is on the bottom, nothing else. And here it could be a background image on which we can place things on top straight away because the image is in the background. Nevertheless, if it's a background or a content image, still we would make this box position take it out of the flow. Because the easiest way to get something towards the bottom of somewhere inside this box in this case is by using bottom 0. So this white box we would set to bottom 0, which would however mean it would then be relative to the viewport. Unless of course we set the parent box, right, this one which ends right here, when we set this one to position relative. And then we are making use of bottom 0, which would send this box down to the bottom. So this as first here. Now let's go into the left area. And inside here we are dealing whatever belongs together should be in a container box. And how can we create columns? So far the only thing that we know is by creating container boxes. So putting two of them next to each other in this case. Now in here are again just container boxes of things that belong together. Let me now use the color red in this case. So it's the celebs in this case, the photos, each section ultimately is its container box. And that container box, that is exactly the unordered list now. Inside there are then the individual list items. So this unordered list is further down in the hierarchy in this case. And we may have wondered, and it's all about boxes. Ultimately, list items will be boxes, boxes, all boxes. And it's so many boxes that we are dealing with on the web. All a website is boxes ultimately. Box, 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 and it's not the case that we need to create them all. We need to create them all when we are only working with HTML and CSS. Later, and therefore it is really inevitable not to use a language, such as for example PHP, by which we can make our content to be dynamic. Now we still need to create one drop-down menu with the major boxes and one sub-box here, by which we can then, however, always reuse all over again. For this sub-box container and this one, and all this drop-down menu, we can reuse the structure of it for all the other list items, but only when we are making use of a language such as PHP. So nothing that we would entirely create the entire time, so many boxes. It's done so many things are done in PHP ultimately in a dynamic way. And this is it now in regards to drop downs. Actually one more comment I want to do, that is responsiveness. There is a week later on that we have on responsiveness. This word I have already pulled out a couple of times, by which we are making our website responsive, meaning okay to be used by all the screen sizes, and not only all the screen sizes, mobile phones, TV screens, but also for touch screens and non-touch screens, meaning this one is a link right now. When it gets hovered, or this list item when it gets hovered, then the box shows up. And there are a little bit of differences to consider with mobile phones or for touchscreen devices in general, because they cannot hover over that area. So something that we will go over later on. And also the different types of shapes here. Now here we have a triangle, for example, and we can see also on this website with a vertical menu, there is a border on the right side that does not go the entire way. So something that we will still see in this course, in this HTML CSS part, which is coming in shortly in a coming week. Now in regards to this border, maybe if we are wondering, so this border of this drop-down list is disappearing as soon as I'm going over with the mouse. Now this one disappears, the right border. But this is exactly what we can do with when we are going over, when hovering over, then border on the right, remove that one, border right, none, for example. So that is nothing complicated, nothing that we cannot yet do. And now let's take a look at the other two lists that we can create, and those ones, nothing long that we will be concentrating on. First of all, there is a list for terms, or for describing terms. And those lists we would most likely only use when we are having a paper on our website, an article, a longer one. We know longer papers, at the end of the paper, there is always an appendix, an attachment with all the terms describing the meanings of a couple of words that have been used in the article. And that is exactly what we are using our third list for, the description list. So let me place this one in our third white box here, the DL element description list. And that one has 2 children and can only have those 2 children. At the same time, those 2 elements that we are now introducing can only be a child of the DL element. So first of all, it's the DT, the description term. And let me now go for an example here. For example, possum. And now let's go for DD, which is the description definition. And here we are describing the description term, the term that we are describing. So this is just a container box, this one as well, this one as well. Nothing that we couldn't do by creating it, by using a div element. However, they have meaning and we should always go for them. So in here comes the explanation then ultimately. Is an animal found most likely in Australia. ... These are description lists. Let me now reload the page. There is a little bit of margin set on the description definition, but nothing special. Now our fourth one is our list that is the details. And that one is quite a new one in HTML, and it also is not yet fully supported. And Microsoft is not supporting it. Let me go for that one. Description. No, that's the tracks. Description. Microsoft is not supporting it. Opera Mini is not supporting it. And even Firefox. So that's our first time that we encounter something like this. However, the newest version of it that just got released, which is still in testing phase, not yet used out there by most of the people, or just by the people who are testing it basically. That one will support it. So in Firefox we are fine very soon. And this is the details list. In here comes and can only come the summary. At the same time, this element can only be a child of the details list. And in here comes the summary of a text. Whatever summary, that's the short version of the text. And then underneath, as immediate next following sibling, comes whatever element we ultimately want to use as container box, whatever makes sense to be used. Here can even be a div element. Inside here can be several paragraphs and images, but that is ultimately the part that will drop down whenever the summary gets clicked. So what the browser is creating us here, it's creating us a drop-down menu already. So this one here will be the full text version of summary. Now Firefox doesn't yet support it, so let me use our Chrome browser in this case. And this is what the browser creates us. This is the summary, and once the summary gets clicked, the full text version gets then shown. And there is an attribute also that we can use here, which is open, a Boolean attribute. Either we want that one to be opened or not. And by default now it's already opened when the website gets loaded. The full text version of the summary is already visible straight away. This is our last list, or actually it's not the last one, there is one more, but that list is a counter list. That is not one that we will be now including in a white box here. And let me go back to the Firefox browser, which doesn't support, here we can see the summary. And there is not not everything can be achieved by using ordered lists, by which we can order our list items with numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, or with 01, 02, 03, etc. However, what we cannot, for example, do is use numbers such as 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and then subheadlines, for example, shall be 2.0, 2.20. So this is a feature, of course, we may know from papers, of course, scientific papers most likely, or longer articles where we are making structure, and there the subheadlines shall be listed in 1.0, and the next one shall be 2.0, etc. And before we go into how to create those so-called counters, we first now take a look at our selectors, because here we are introducing another selectors here. And then we have now all a type of a pseudo selector as well as a pseudo element selector, which we already have with first letter and first line, which we have already gone over. So first of all, the category here is element selectors. So here we are selecting the elements. And these are attribute selectors, which we haven't yet discussed one of them. However, ultimately they will also select an element by its attribute. Select the element with the attribute X, Y, whatever attribute we ultimately want. And they are very similar, all of them are the same as element, just referring to attributes ultimately. So nothing that we need to learn here as well. Once we know the elements, we know the attributes as well, basically. And then come the pseudo selectors. And the pseudo selectors are faked selectors. They are not selecting the element. And those pseudo selectors can be divided up into two categories. First of all, it's pseudo element selectors, which we have right here. And then we have pseudo class selectors right on the right side. Pseudo element and pseudo class. And both of them are faked selectors. Both of them are pseudo selectors. We're not selecting the element. Instead, what pseudo class selectors do, they select the state of the element. What condition the element is in at this given point. When the mouse goes over the element, in that condition it is now in. The mouse is over the element. And these are pseudo class selectors, all of them right here, the entire list. And then there are pseudo element selectors, and they are not selecting the elements, but they are also not referring to the state of the element. So basically everything else is a pseudo element selector. So in this case, first letter, we are not selecting the element, but we are selecting the first letter inside that element or first line, and also after and before, which we are now introducing, which we need in order to create, for example, those counters, so-called counters right here. But those ones we not necessarily need to use for counters. They can also be used for creating shapes, for example. So they have further usage. So let's go for before and after, first of all, what they are. We can create with them a virtual child inside the element that we have selected. Either a first virtual child or a last virtual child. So let me therefore target now our H2 elements, which we want to insert something. Those subheadlines shall be listed ultimately with 1.0, 2.0, etc. So here is the headline number 1, headline 2, and there is one more further down. And those ones I will now be targeting, and I will be using the before selector on, which is exactly the same as the after selector. The only difference is one creates a virtual child before and the other one after. So here H2, and then let me use before. And here we can see also the difference. These ones should be, can be used with one element, with one only, but should be used with two. That is the common way of differentiating them from regular pseudo state selectors, pseudo class selectors, and these are pseudo element selectors here. So H2 : before, and it goes hand in hand. Now we have created an element already. Let me reload the page right here, and let me inspect the element. And this is our H2 element. It's not yet visible though. So we need to specify the content. So we are creating a virtual element here with that before. So as first child of H2, and we always need to specify what do we want inside that element. Even if we ultimately do not want anything inside it, we always need to specify that property. If we don't want anything, we just leave those quotation marks empty, and when we want something, we are using quotation marks again because we are specifying text, and we are inserting now text into that element that has been inserted as first child of the h2 element. And in here, let me just go for 1.0, for example, and also use a white space afterwards, so there is a little bit of a gap after. And this is now what's been created. Once again, let me inspect the element. Here we can see it. This is now the virtual element that's been created. And whatever we determine by using content property, whatever value we are using here, that will be inserted into that virtual element right in there. And after does exactly the same thing, just that it creates a virtual element after as last child of the h2 element. So content always goes hand in hand with before and after, and that is exactly the reason why I have placed the content property right there. Even though it's actually a property, it has nothing to do with being a selector. But because it always belongs to those, that's why I inserted it right here. So that's the reason for it. Now let's go into the actual counters. We already have now marked our subheadlines 1.0, 1.0, 1.0, but of course that one shall be 1.0, that one shall be 2.0, so there must somehow be a counting going on that the browser shall do. And that counting we are achieving by first of all creating a counter by using the counter reset property. And that creating of the counter must always happen on the parent. On the parent or somewhere on some parent before we are doing the actual counting on here h2. So in this case, let me select the article in this case. And I'm now setting the counter first of all. And that is counter reset. Setting the counter, and this counter, whichever name we give it, will then be reset to 0. So let me now just name it whatever we want to. Let me name it sub. And we want that counter ultimately to increase always when we are reaching the h2 element before. That is when we want it to increase. So that is where we are using h2 before, right before the text starts. We want that counter to increment, to increase by 1. Not necessarily do we need to increase it by 1. We can also use +3, for example, -2. We have quite some option here, but in this case, let me just go for the rather regular option. So this counter increment, whatever name we have given it right here, where we have reset it to 0, that one we now want to increment here. So it's now changing from 0 to 1 when it reaches the h2 element, and it does it before the text. And then once again, next h2 element, it increments again before the text. And that incrementing, that is the content that we want to use, that counter, that current counter number we want to use as content. And that is not defined as text, but with a function, the counter function. And here we are inserting now the counter value that currently is there. Either it's 1, 2, 3, whatever number is currently there shall be inserted right here. And we can also attach some text to it, for example, 0.0, and then also a white space. And this is exactly now where we have our counter. This is number 2, this is number 3, and further up the page, here is number 1. One more example, let's take a look at our sub headlines, and those ones ultimately shall be 1.1, 1.2. So we will once again create a counter. First of all, where do we want that content to be placed in? h3, right before the text, as first child. h3 before. Let's start in the same way. h3 before, as first child, before that text actually. We want some content in there. We want the content, and the content that we want is the one from the counter sub that we have already created. So counter sub. And also then we are making quotation marks dot. And then comes the sub counter, another counter that we will now be creating. And that counter we need to set first of all, that there shall be a counter by using counter reset. And that one must be set on a parent before that element. And we cannot use the article as well, the same article that we have used right here. Because if we would do so, for example, if I call it sub sub, then this one overrides this one. It's exactly the same property. So therefore I have created here another container box which comes before the h3 element. And on that one, which I have given an ID of reset container, exactly there I will reset the counter. And then the name I will give it must of course be different as well. The counter reset sub sub in this case, I'm calling it. And that is exactly the second value now. So it's the counter sub in this case, and then the counter sub sub dot counter sub sub. And then also to have a white space afterwards, that the text is not on top of each other. Right here an empty space here. And here we go, it's 1.0 and 1.0, because of course we still need to increment it before, always at each counter. And the counter that we want to increase always by 1 or by more, complete up to us, or minus negative something, the counter that we want to increment is sub sub. And now everything is working fine. And this is the actual article for it, and here are the list items, which I have done the wrong example. It should actually be 1, 1, 1, 1, and 1, 2 should be the sub children right here. But doesn't matter whichever now we are adding, whichever additionally we are using ultimately. Let me just add another one. So this is the list item. Let me copy and paste this list item over right into here. Then ultimately we'll have 0.4 and here 3.1, 3.2, so it updates automatically. It's a dynamic system here going on. And these are the counters, our last lists that we wanted to discuss in this week. Next week we are going over tables, everything that relates to tables. And tables used to be used for creating layouts on the website, which is not done nowadays anymore for the reason of accessibility, because tables do not have any meaning. Nevertheless, what do tables consist of? They just consist of boxes, nothing else. So of cells, that's one cell maybe, that's another cell, and this cell consists of maybe 2 other cells ultimately. So it's all about, tables are all about boxes once again. And those boxes can nevertheless, those tables can also be created in CSS, not only HTML. We have both options, and both of them we will be taking a look at next week.